Hello, welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events. We explore the underlying connections and root causes that help us discover what is really true, and that creates an antiviral mindset that can help inoculate us in a sickening age, an age of deviant behavior, a sea of chaos.
Yeah, welcome. That's exciting.
Welcome.
Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah.
You use the phrase, and I think we do every time, the word explore.
Explore.
I always, in my head, hear
I like that one. You had a
explore
different one.
strange new worlds, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, when you think of the Star Trek introduction,
Yeah.
I'm not a huge Trekkie, but do you hear Captain Kirk or Captain Picard?
Oh, it's the Kirk one.
Yeah.
Oh,
See,
yeah,
That's
it's
the
not even
generation gap
close.
between us, I think.
Yeah. The final
All
frontier.
of 10 years made all the difference, huh?
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah. I grew up, and the funny thing is the original Star Trek was only really a couple seasons. And it was canceled.
And it was canceled. Yeah, it
like
was the
3
movie
seasons.
that made the difference,
The
right?
movies were
The
big.
motion picture.
Yeah.
I mean,
they
I
were big.
remember when I saw that motion picture, I was shocked as a kid. Like,
Really?
this was amazing.
Yeah.
When they're traveling through, it like
I know.
expanded your concept of.
Yeah.
It wasn't aliens as green men; it was aliens
Yeah.
as like world builders.
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
just changed.
Yeah.
The special effects were really moving.
Yeah, they were. And the funny thing about it too is the first movie, if you go back, it wasn't that great. It was, I mean, the effects were good, but it's the Wrath of Khan, the second movie.
It's the real.
It was, oh my god.
Well, that was see, the Wrath of
great
Khan
movie.
was a real story.
I know, that's exactly right.
The other one was just establishing that
Totally right.
that like this campy show can actually put out something that feels real.
Yeah.
And I think that's really Star Wars like raised the bar for
yeah.
all sci-fi. And
Yeah.
they you know, they're
But-
still echoing today.
And it was the first one. The first Star Wars was a cultural event.
So now there's umpteen Star Trek shows out there, right? I mean, so many you don't
Yeah.
even know.
Yeah. There's
How
several.
long until Disney does the same with Star Wars?
Mm.
Where there'll just be a half dozen all the time, different Star Wars shows on.
Well, I think Disney has already done that with Star Wars.
They kind of have, yeah.
I mean, the Clone Wars and all the episodes that they can stream, and of course, 9 movies now,
yeah, that's true.
plus 9 actually real ones, plus some 3 inserted ones.
That's probably the difference is that Star Wars has held on more to movies, and Star Trek
Turned into television.
turned it to
shows,
television,
series.
and it was pre-streaming. You
Yeah.
know, now that it's streaming,
We've
I think
actually
it'll
watched.
change.
My wife and I watched Voyager, one of the Star Trek ones. We actually watched the whole thing twice.
Wow.
I mean, we watched it, and then about 10 years later, we watched it again. It held up really well. It's an interesting. Well, you know what it is Gene Roddenberry, and the ideas are what's underlying it. The on second thought, unexpected intro here, on ramp to our ideas, but on second thought, notices what it is it's the use of tech for creating an Eden,
Yeah.
for the salvation of the
Yeah.
world.
Utopia.
Yeah, for a utopia. That technology can do it, and we can advance. And really, this is the thing that we can advance beyond the barbaric behavior of our World War II, World War I, even Vietnam would be the more recent ones, but the past of our barbaric activities and behavior.
Yeah. There's the unintended message, though. I'm going to go woke on you a little bit here. Is it portrays the barbarians are the foreigners.
The barbarians.
So
Are
it's
the foreigners.
it's very much
Okay.
the like the civilized humans, you could substitute Americans,
Yeah.
are going to go out with their high moral ideals and rescue the natives from themselves, right?
That's probably true, especially the Picard one, Next Generation. There was a lot of moralizing in that one, but they address a lot of ethical situations. But I think what's interesting about it, what I find most interesting, and I keep returning to, is I find that talking about an antiviral mindset, I think there is in our culture an idea that we have advanced beyond certain brutalities.
Right.
And I don't believe that's true. And so there is shock today. I think the Ukraine war was a shock to the system of Americans that Putin, and it's all on Putin. he must be an outlier of an evil man.
Right.
And I don't believe that that's true. I think that we as a world, the brokenness of humanity is the same as it was 100 years ago or whatnot. We just we can be as brutal as we have ever been, and I think actually that we will be, but it's disturbing. I think we actually think there won't be a war, another world war,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't think that that's true at all.
Well, anytime you have a utopian ideal, it is a moral frame. So there will be moralizing to go with it, whether you're Christian or
Yeah.
you're, you know,
Yeah.
a socialist Marxist.
Yeah,
Because you say, well, if only we could establish this kingdom, then the
Yeah.
world would be made
and you
new.
can look at things happening, and this can segue into the first point that I have here. But you can look at it happening. The January 6th prisoners. If you strip it back, you have to make this statement, and it's a true one. The United States of America's free democratic republic has imprisoned its political opponents without trial, without guilt. It has basically, by the use of might and power, said, we're throwing you in prison. There's nothing you can do about it.
Well, and that's what they're trying to do to Trump.
And that's what they're trying to do to a more public figure. These have all been quiet people that are no-namers.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to do it. And whether they're trying to do that or they're trying to deplete his resources or what the case may be, it's on the pathway. But it's a startling thing to recognize what's happening with the January 6th, that this is literally what happens in third world countries that have no rule of any decency at all.
Well,
and we're doing it.
And they're all but forgotten
are.
by even the conservative leaders.
And let's be honest, or I'll be honest, I read articles and I see an appeal for this January 6th, this person, and it's their bio. And some news site is feeling compassionate. Here's where they are. Here's who they are. Here's how many kids they have at home. Here's what they did. They're asking for monies. And I read a little bit of it, and then I don't want to read anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the weeds. There's too many of them. There's too much to care about. And I don't... They're asking for money and to support them. I'm not sure if the money's going to go to them or not. You know, there's all these other questions. But the truth is, I find myself disconnecting about something, right, and not caring.
Well, that is... So Trump fashioned himself as the champion of the forgotten people, you know, the less employed. And I was at January 6th. It was a lot of rednecks. It was a lot of, you know, the blue collar, lower socioeconomic status that were there to have their voice heard for once.
Yeah.
And they thought Trump would back that.
Yeah.
And he invited them. He said, come on out. It's going to be wild.
Yeah.
And it was wild, but he didn't back them.
Yeah, I do agree with you on this. I think that is a disappointing thing. He has been minimally engaged. His rhetoric is powerful.
Yeah.
And he has not included them very much. He has a little bit.
But that is
not
the
very
difference.
much.
That is the divide within the Republican Party, because Trump brought those people in who, you know, Ben Shapiro or even, you know, Mitt Romney, John McCain. Those are the dignified Republicans. They don't want they don't want the rednecks rolling in with their messy, loud behavior.
Did you happen to see the Never Trumper article in the New York Times? Is it our fault? What's his name? David Brooks?
No.
Did you have? Oh my goodness. Very interesting. So
Was
he's
this
a
recent?
Republican. Oh yeah, it was in the last couple of days. But he wrote, "Are we the problem?" and really, and it's a very interesting article. Of course, then you get a bunch of snarky responses, articles. Yes, you are, sir. Or
Of course,
whatever.
right? Yeah.
But he writes for the New York Times. David Brooks. He is a Republican, but he's a never Trumper. He's one of the Republicans that the New York Times likes, right?
Yeah.
And in any case, he writes it, and it's actually very well done. He asks some very intriguing questions. He calls himself a part of the elite establishment, the highly Ivy League educated
class.
Yep. And he pits that, and he thinks Trump is a moral monster and all that. But he says, have we created this? Have we created Trump because of how we have flown over the flyover country ideas, that we have done what we thought was best for us, but not what has been best for the country, and we are the minority.
Right.
And so it's a strikingly honest one. I can't believe it got published. It's a good read.
Well, the New York Times will publish anything where a conservative says it's my fault.
But
I mean, David French's whole shtick is to say it's Christians' fault.
I know. That's true. That's true.
But that doesn't mean he's not wrong,
Yeah.
or that he is wrong.
Yeah.
I would agree with him. I think that, the elitists in general are what Trump is out against. And that
I
Trump
think
saw
so
his
too.
window. His window was, these are the forgotten people, so that's who I'll speak to.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why he became a Republican, because he knew that that's how he would
I
get
totally agree with that, because the reality is he was he was a fence sitter as a New York businessman.
there. Right. He just wanted to be popular.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see that to this day.
And yet, I agree with that. And yet, at the same time, I really don't think he could have chosen the other side, because I think he actually does love our country. I think he likes to build buildings. I think he has this old world idea of doing a good thing, even though it can be surrounded with bombastic temperament. And that would not have fit in the Democrat. It would not have fit in that fold.
It makes me think of like the old school mob bosses who sort of fancy themselves as the leaders of the community.
That's right.
Like,
because
yeah,
they were
we do things
protecting
our
the
way,
Italians, because
this is
nobody
our,
else did.
Yeah, this is our community.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty fair, in a sense, like a mafia boss in the old world idea. He's a protector.
Right.
And he'll bend the law.
Versus what we think of, and it'd be interesting because there is some of that in the gang world as well, right? Like famously in the 60s and 70s, the Black Panthers were helping the people of Oakland,
Yeah.
right? But there is still this mentality, I don't know about the Black Panthers, but there's still a mentality that I see among, you could say, gang leaders or organized crime of the inner city.
This is our family.
This is our family, but also that like we protect our own against the system.
Yeah.
Whereas the stereotype or the image I think of from movies of the mob bosses is this is our community. So they stretched wider to control. So they wanted to get into city council. They wanted to control the government, the mafia. And therefore they could
More
become respectable
geographic.
because I'm on city council now. I'm on the on the planning commission.
That's
like
true. Purchase a politician.
They wanted to step up. They want to dress nice, right? Versus that we're aliens from the system or we're separate
Oh, that's interesting.
and we're against the system and we want to tear it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's interesting.
That's venturing into stuff I'm not really familiar with. I'm just sort of
Well, we'll segue on one of yours. Do you still have we had Trump as old world mafia leader.
Yeah.
Did I see some note Trump as stepdad?
Okay, so here's what I was listening to somebody comment about how Iowa was going to go. This was a political commentator. The Iowa primary.
Caucus,
it's not a primary, caucus. And he was talking about how Trump is the proven leader. DeSantis has a track record. Everybody else just has talk. So then, among them,
In political realm.
Vivek is a great talker, but what has he actually done? Right? What do
Nothing
we don't know what
politically.
he's actually going to do.
Just built a business.
He's an organizer. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, in the sense of business and
yeah,
whatnot.
yeah.
And it dawned on me with all this political conversations that the pundits think of Trump and DeSantis and all these different politicians as an employee they're hiring.
Okay.
And so they're holding them to a standard like you would as a boss. But most people have never hired anybody. Most people have never conducted an interview and a background check and all those things. They're familiar with it, but they usually are on the receiving end. And so to the voting public, the Trump voter, let's say, or the potential Trump voter, it's more like you're hiring a boss. And this is what I said, it's like a stepdad. Is this guy going to care about us? Is he going to give us, is he going to take us to Disneyland when we want to go? And then maybe they care less about some of the like on the job details or the is he responsible? Because most voters' mentality, and I think this is the influence of popular culture descending into debauchery, right? Is that the mentality of the voter is decreasing in age, right? What an 8-year-old wants out of a stepdad is a lot different than what a 17-year-old or an adult.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think the population is an adult.
Yeah. Yeah, the political class deals with, well, let's say foreign policy, for example. We know that, but I really don't know the nations. If you talk Ukraine, when I talk with Ukraine with people, and they start talking Belarus, and they start talking Odessa, and I get lost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the political press, man, this is the stuff they know and love. So they want questions that are far more detailed about the job than even I, who stay on top of it more than most citizens.
Yeah.
A citizen's concern is far less. We want to kind of get a sense, is the guy a good guy? And we want to
Yeah,
hear a
good
few
guys and
issues,
bad guys. And then I know how to, yeah.
and that's it. And I think that's a good point.
So the other side of that, to expand on it, I was talking to my brother, and he was lamenting conversations. He's not a Republican, or he's sort of a conservative-leaning Democrat, is what I would say. But he was criticizing Republicans speaking of Trump in such glowing fashion when his moral failings are so obvious.
Yes.
And contrasting that to how conservatives spoke about Obama and how it was his moral failings that kept him out, right? Because that's the go-to. When a conservative is saying, why won't you vote for this guy? Well, morally, he's questionable. Right? The Clintons, the big
Some
example.
of them, yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. Because I too would overlook some of Trump's, like his terrible marriages, his questionable business dealings. Why would I overlook that? What's really going on? And it comes down to, I think that he has a better picture of the future that I'm involved in. Like he wants the good for me. I don't think that Obama does. Like even now, I think Obama's behind the scenes working against the best interests of the American middle class.
That's in my notes to come up too.
With
I
a
agree
twisted
with
picture.
you.
Yeah, maybe you can
He's
speak
a
to that.
destroyer, I think.
That's a
He
big
wants
statement.
to fundamentally change. This is his words.
Right.
We're going to fundamentally change America.
But that could mean anything.
Yes, it could, but doesn't time give us those hints of what the meaning is?
So tell us what you're seeing.
Oh man, I didn't know if I wanted to get in this quite so early. Well, I've had this thought for a while, and I know a lot of people are, is Obama really running the show? And I ended up trending towards the idea that it was more of a chaos, a lot of people. But the more I think about it, the more I think he's a hub.
Yeah.
So Susan Rice, for example, I think is back there running.
Well, everybody in the
national
Obama
affairs.
administration is a former.
They are.
The current
His
Biden is a
holdovers-
former Obama.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I tacked that idea on there, and then the more and more, and the word that came to me recently was a shell. Joe Biden is a shell of an individual. He is no longer a competent, capable man. It's not that he can't have moments of lucidity. I think he still does, but he has, here we're going to say things that really require diagnosis, but we have zero audience, so it doesn't matter. Low audience. But he appears dementia. He has a mental
without a doubt.
decline.
Yeah.
But we say it without a doubt, but we're not doctors. In a sense, it's not quite fair to say that.
Okay.
But it's fair to observe that this
I'm
is what it
completely
looks
convinced.
like. You're completely convinced. Well, you know what? I'm pretty convinced, but I would still hold myself back because that's not fair.
That's big of you.
But the point is, he is not running a sound game. He's not running. He's not got his eye on the ball because he's not in the game.
Right.
I just saw a note the other day. Somebody cataloged his vacation days, and it's literally been over 300 and some odd days out of a 2-year stretch or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's been about half on vacation. And they bring this up as an accusation, and I think, okay, it's a fair point, but you know what? It doesn't resonate with me as an accusation because the accusation assumes that he could be and should be on the job.
Well, that's
He's
why,
not.
even though they say
He's never been.
365 days of vacation,
Yeah.
nobody really blinks an eye because they know he's on vacation every day.
Yeah. So I've had this complaint I've had growing in me for several months now. From the right, the commentators, we keep saying the Biden admin, the Biden admin, the Biden administration, the Biden administration. And I can't figure out if I like it or hate it. So my objection is this. There is no Biden administration.
Okay.
Biden is not leading anything.
Right.
So
Well, you
part of
know
me
all
says-
those people that were former Obama, that they're calling Obama to check in.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What
Now,
should we do here?
The problem is, if you run with that and you call it Obama administration 2, what proof do you actually have?
3. Term
Obama
number
administration 3,
Yeah,
term
yeah.
3, sure, better. What proof do you have? You open yourself up to being slammed by the left,
Okay.
which they would have a decent point. Prove it. And you don't have any. He doesn't. And the press is not willing to
there's
track who's going
proof-
in and out of his house.
Proof is a high bar. I would say that there's a lot of evidence.
Yes.
The most significant being that he's the only president, realistically, to stay in D.C.
It is
To buy a
literally the
mansion.
only one who has done it in 100 years.
I think FDR stayed because he was sick. But I could be
Okay.
wrong. Wilson. I think it was
Okay.
Woodrow
It
Wilson.
was Woodrow
He was
Wilson.
sick and dying,
We
so
read
he
the
didn't
same
leave.
article.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we did. We talked about this article.
Yeah. Okay, so to me, that is a huge marker.
Strategy wise,
That
what would you prefer though?
Every administration official,
I agree with you.
ambassadors can come and go
That
from his
persuades me
mansion.
also.
Who's keeping the log?
Yeah.
There's a log of who goes to the White House.
Yeah.
No, I don't see any logs about
So
who's
would
going
it
to
better
Obama's
be
house.
for the right? Is it a better thing to saddle what's happening on Biden because he's on the ticket? We pretend that Trump is going to run against Biden. Biden didn't run last time.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? He did not campaign. And so we're like letting the status quo as if it's normal, and we're using that language. And I'm wondering if we're shooting ourselves in the foot as conservatives. Would it be better to stop saying the Biden administration? It's not his administration.
So here's the thought, as you say that, is Trump's not going to run, or I don't know that Trump will be the nominee. I know he's ahead. I think there's a lot against him, and I don't think
there's
it's
a
in
lot
our
of
best
time.
interest
We'll
that
just say
he
there's
even
a
be.
lot of time between now and
But
then.
who can know? Whoever runs as a Republican is not running against Biden.
No.
They're running against a machine.
That's correct.
And the machine will
completely
choose a
agree.
figurehead based
Yes.
on who they think.
Which my prediction has been
best.
Newsom.
But what's crazy to me is that people who are lifelong Democrats, I think, are totally aware of that fact and totally content with it. That our betters will select. We won't need to select.
They're not seeing the machine as cheating, though.
And, well, no, but they're accepting that
Machinery.
the Democrat machine,
Yeah.
which is highly correlated or connected with
I
the
think
deep
you're
state.
right. I think
because
you're right.
Obama significantly built the deep state
Yeah.
the way that we see it.
Yes.
In the sense that
He's
he
weaponized it
established
in a way nobody
not
else
just not just the leaders of different administrative functions, but layers down.
Yes.
Right. And the military
Well,
was
look
well
at Clinton.
documented on how he manipulated
His
the military
own
leaders.
Clinton's attorney general has the Ken Starr special prosecution because she thought it was politically more neutral appearing, and it was a pain in the behind for Clinton. That never would happen today.
Right.
Their own DOJ would never do something to make it seem politically fair. They'd just skew it.
Yeah. The crazy thing to me is that also under Obama's administration is when, and this is from that article, is when the social media platforms became so powerful.
Yeah, I agree.
And so now you've got a deep state with a massive propaganda arm in Facebook and Instagram and not really Twitter anymore. That's interesting. That was kind of a coup.
Yeah.
So it's a steep battle for anybody, no matter who they put it on the
And
front.
then if you want to talk about coincidences, you have then, I mean, Obama never could have planned this, but the election of Trump, they did think Hillary was going to win. She didn't. Trump wins. And the media on that day says, we're going to leave our former objective view of trying to speak truth to power, and we are morally obligated because we think this is a Hitler.
We got to stop Hitler.
Yep, this is Hitler.
Do they really think, though, that it's Hitler?
I think some.
I think
of them do.
some of them do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I still keep asking. Like, there's so many opportunities that Trump had to take power. Right.
Oh yeah.
COVID's the best one. He could
evidence-
have become the tyrant
evidence
that
is
they
not
all
there.
claimed he would.
That's right.
And instead,
rioting and
he
National
handed it
Guard.
to Fauci and let Fauci do it.
I know, which was a horrible mistake.
Yeah.
That's probably his biggest. I personally think that way he handled COVID is his biggest failure and the thing that has short-circuited.
All right, so this whole thing came in around this question of J.K. Rowling.
Oh, you want to go back?
Yeah, because you brought up January
I know,
6th
I
and
know,
these people
I know.
being persecuted,
I went
prosecuted.
down your route instead.
But how does that connect to J.K. Rowling?
Here's the point. On the J6, the unbelievable actions of our government is you have to look at evidence for the way things are, and we are now an oppressing government. Anyway, there's another story that just happened. The J.K. Rowling, Seattle, the Museum of Popular Art, has decided she and Harry Potter books, which are by any definition still on the vanguard of popular everything,
Yeah.
she will not be in their museum. The man that runs the museum,
That's crazy.
Leading the board, her name has been eradicated. He himself is transgender, and he says that she is a TERF, a transgender something.
Trans-exclusive
radical
radical
feminists.
feminist. Yeah.
So it's trying to say that the old line feminists, because they almost like the gays against groomers, right?
Yeah.
An old line liberal position said the rest of you have gone way too far and you're shooting us all. We don't go as far as you and we don't think that that's right.
Right.
So they're being crucified by their former allies. And so the feminists have said, Rowling, feminism now needs to include that transgenders can compete and actually destroy women's vocations, women's sports, etc. And Rowling says, I don't
Women's
agree
privacy,
with that.
women's safety,
All
in
these
locker
things,
rooms,
yeah,
and
that's right.
prisons.
Yeah, it's just a wide array. And she has stood up, and in that sense, she's become an enemy now, and so the turf. So she's eradicated. And what struck me about that was it's its own storyline, but more significantly, I think, is that this is legitimate persecution. This is ideological persecution.
Yeah.
And what struck me is that the element you mentioned one last week, last episode, but strange bedfellows, and the idea that Roosevelt and Stalin are bedfellows against Hitler because the circumstances drive them together against a common foe. These two prior enemies and post-World War II enemies as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's happening to us. So J.K. Rowling is not a friend to Christianity. She is a leftist.
Liberal Christianity at best.
At best, that's right.
So she appreciates the Christian symbology, and we'll put it into Harry Potter.
Sure, that's true.
He defeats Satan
but
by
now,
dying.
from the Christian right perspective, or not as a movement, but from the right or a Christian perspective, she's our ally,
Yeah.
right? She's our ally because she's standing against an excessive form of deviancy that is destroying things. And then my next thought was, if she's our ally, you know what that really does mean is we are really not more than a step away from Christianity being legitimately persecuted in our country. Yeah. Her position on trans not destroying women, which is essentially, as a Christian, that's what all Christians, in a sense, need to hold also. If they're holding anything biblical, is a God made male and female, and to have transgenderism destroy one of the species that God made, all Christians have to stand against that.
Okay, so it's interesting thinking about persecution, and I immediately want to define terms, right? Which I think is a good way to start out conversations on this. Because if, in my mind, if I imagine, okay, what if there was an author who had open sympathies toward Nazis and denied the Holocaust? And yet they had written this popular book. Let's
Kanye
imagine.
has said some things that are like moving into that area.
Who's that?
Kanye.
Oh, yeah. Well, and he got canceled for sure,
He
right?
did.
And so there are people, and I wouldn't target Kanye, but I would target like Nick Fuentes, who was sort of Kanye's handler in the midst of all. He was at his elbow, giving him things to say, putting words in his mouth in disturbing ways. And this guy's an open, I was seeing clips of him this week calling for the removal of the age of consent. That any woman or any girl who can have babies should, or some crazy, stupid, perverted thing. So if that guy had written some popular book series, I wouldn't want those in the museum that my kids attend. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
And so is that persecution? I think it is. The question is, what's the moral frame that will be the foundation of our society?
Yeah.
And that's really what we're saying, is that
agree.
Christianity was the moral frame. And even if you weren't a Christian, you could come stand on it, and it'd be stable ground for you to build life.
That was my point about theistic.
Yeah.
If you you don't have to be a Christian even to walk in this world.
And I'll find this quote. You don't have to be a Christian to live in a Christian nation or a Christian society.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're not a Christian, you don't get as much of a say. You shouldn't, because you're going to lead us toward where we are now. And that's what I mean by the sea of chaos. The difference between solid ground and a sea of chaos is that it's always moving. It's always changing.
Yeah.
And so if it's
I'm gonna differ with that phrase. That one.
Which one?
If you're not a Christian.
Nation. Oh yeah.
I'm gonna say if you're not a theist.
Mm-hmm. That's a Boy Scout. The Boy Scout said you don't have to be Christian. You just have to believe in God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is what
The problem is there's no fighting. There's nobody fighting for the theism. There's no activists, theistic activists, right?
Yeah. Well, what? Yeah.
And that strategy becomes down to that on some level. What is he?
Yeah. I mean, isn't he a theist? He might say he's Christian, but he's saying it in the old world way of just culturally This is his moral framework.
But so I would say
Marriage number 7 or whatever,
what fuels
and-
his fire is a patriotism born in post-war America.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So
It's theistic.
the common term is the boomer conservative.
Yeah.
That we get, and that's what MAGA is. We're going to get back to that 1960s prosperity and suburban contentment, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
that's an interesting question.
Okay.
All right, where are we going next?
I don't know.
I want to talk about Ricky Gervais
Ricky Gervais.
because that connects to what we were just saying. We were talking about
Okay.
theism, and he's an atheist. Can he be a moral person, right? And I don't want to relitigate all that. I think we made some good progress on that. But I remember a quote of his. I think he was on Stephen Colbert, who's an open about his Catholic faith.
Yeah.
And he said, if you search history and cultures around the world, there's 10,000 gods. And you Christians say,
Which is Joseph Campbell quote.
okay, you Christians say, I don't believe in 9,999 of them.
Yeah.
I just believe in one. And
Yeah.
Ricky says, well, I just have one less than you.
Yeah.
And what dawned on me is that isn't a Christian worldview.
No, it isn't.
A Christian worldview is there are 10,000 beings.
That's right. That's right.
Many of whom claim to or fight to be in the position of God.
Biblically, Psalm
But there is
82.
one God above all the gods.
That's right.
That's
That's
the
right.
Christian faith.
Yeah.
But part of what happened to Christianity, and I think this was our effort, our meaning Christians, our effort to be palatable to the intellectuals, we put away
That's
what
right.
looked like superstition
That's correct.
to the educated
Totally
class and said spirituality is wishy-washy and it's for
Well,
hippies.
and we overemphasize one point of scripture to the neglect of another. We overemphasize there is no God but God.
Yeah.
And so then we ended up, by our silence, implicating that the other gods aren't real at all.
And so I think if for many people going to church regularly, they're going to conclude that that is what Christians believe.
I know.
Because if you were interacting with spiritual beings, then you're going to get into casting out demons, which most churches don't talk about. If they do it, it's in a hidden space, which is not how Jesus did it.
No.
When Jesus
Yeah.
did it, it was public, it was open, it was shocking, and it was normal. It was
Yeah.
part of people's normal experience to see someone spiritually oppressed and then set free. And, we hear rumors of it, but usually we push it to like, well, that's what charismatics do after they're done speaking in tongues. you know?
Yeah. We're not talking about necessarily there is a form of spiritual warfare that is an engagement with angelic beings, but we're actually talking about something I think that is a little more foundational and that is the idea that what populates the world are beings that were given a status engaging with humanity, and they haven't gone away.
Right.
And they were called gods, and Scripture does affirm them as gods, lowercase g.
Yeah.
But Scripture says that they wanted to rise up and be the equivalent of uppercase G.
Correct.
And that Yahweh, true God, came and said, no, you're not that. That's me only. And what we lost then is, as Christianity in the West, the Americanized version, we lost the reality of lowercase g's really still exist. And they're really out there. And we're not even now talking about the charismatic debate of what kind of power warfare should you have. We're going back to the subset of what's reality made of.
Yeah.
Are these things, forget the argument between evangelicals and charismatics about how to engage in warfare.
Right.
Just lay that aside for a sec. What about their very existence as a part of the world system and structure?
Well, and beyond the world system, I think of it more in terms of the practical day-to-day experience. That when you are tormented with thoughts that you don't know where they come from, but they don't feel
Well, I think
safe,
that's where it has to go.
how do you explain it?
Yeah.
Right? And if you can't explain it, like, oh, it's just neurons firing, what's you going to do, right? Maybe there's some medicine I can take. You become helpless in the face of what the Bible describes as evil intention on the part of these beings.
So this is an unplanned comment I'm going to make real quick, just for the fun of it. I'm going to make a plug for...
These are always the best ones.
Always a plug for fantasy literature. This is why I like fantasy literature and science fiction.
Yeah.
But it's more the fantasy side, because fantasy literature does not deny this layer of reality in existence. There's always an overlord of some dimensional existence that has superiority, has an evil genius in a sense, but not human, but spiritual powers.
Yeah.
And these are then always a race between dark and light, good and bad, etc., etc. And it's the destruction of the world is at stake, and the cosmos, right?
Yeah.
Which I know it's a taste-driven genre, but one of the things I like about it is that its storylines are always wrapped up with this set of reality, that there are other beings or other dimensions to reality. And it is a big fight, that there's a big fight going on.
Yeah, what's interesting, it makes me think of is whenever somebody tries to do that, but keep it in a like real world, so not introduce fantasy creatures, it always ends up with like a Sherlock Holmes fighting occult practitioners in positions of power.
Yeah.
It almost, that feels like the only thing we have.
So this was a big argument and debate between Lewis and Tolkien, what you just mentioned.
Oh, okay. I didn't know this.
Tolkien was very frustrated, so they're a part of a friendship group for a very long time. Tolkien is instrumental in Lewis becoming a Christian.
Yeah.
And but they had also both been highly involved with medieval literature and ancient literature, and so the medieval worldviews, which have gods and whatnot in them and angelic beings, they both embrace, and they love this. When it comes to then writing their own, Tolkien, of course, writes The Lord of the Rings, a creation that is completely in a new world. Lewis writes the Narnia series,
Where
but
the
he
worlds
centers
interact.
it. Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. And Tolkien's criticism of Lewis was always that you are too tied to this world and you're not able to communicate what you want. You have to step into a new world altogether. And that you should leave the primary world, they called it, the primary world, and invest your imagination completely in a secondary world.
So don't make it in Narnia, make it in Middle-earth.
That's right.
Right.
Or make
A version of
Narnia,
Earth.
but don't make it for British kids that come, from England and go in there, and then they go back to the primary world. So,
But I
know.
think Tolkien's work is superior in so many ways.
It's an
But I
interesting
respect
question.
that perspective. Like, I think Lewis had a better idea, which is or I don't know if it's better, but I think it draws you into a more useful frame.
It's
In other
a
words,
good debate.
people have a lot more conversations, in my experience, relating their own faith to Narnia than they ever do to Lord of the Rings.
One of the things that Tolkien was critical of Lewis is he doesn't like overt archetypes. So Aslan is the King Jesus, and Tolkien says that's too
Tolkien
close.
mixes his
You have to dig
can't make
deeper.
Gandalf Jesus no matter how hard you try.
No,
Right.
No, but he's an angelic being. It's not too hard to get to that.
Yeah. I've heard pastors try where they're like, he died and then he fought Satan.
Yeah.
I was like, but he also...
Tolkien doesn't want those one-to-one super close connections.
Right.
He thinks they should be further apart so that myth, and this gets into a whole nother topic we won't do, but that the idea of myth will function in its subconscious layers to benefit you, to do you good.
So is he speaking the language of what is it, Nietzsche and the collective subconscious?
Yes, his ideas are going to get much closer to that.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But I feel like so much of the work we do, and pastors and people that just want to make disciples, is bringing the subconscious to the surface, bringing the spiritual into the visible.
Yeah.
Right? Which is the act of faith that you don't walk by.
Well, there's a reason
sight.
they both have their fans. And there's a reason when you throw in Christians, the fans of Narnia are the group is a lot more Christian.
But here's what I see. Fans of Narnia, I feel like fans of Tolkien are way more rabid. Right?
That's true.
They want to dress up. They want to live it out.
That's true.
And and partly the movie quality is like far and away superior, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the story's tied into that, and the character's
agree.
depth and richness because of that complexity. That he's not just cookie cuttering. This lion represents
It's when
Jesus.
you get into myth, you can be more abstract.
Right.
And so it is more the nature of good. You don't have to be a Christian to identify with the good guys.
But I don't see
Middle-earth.
anybody using Lord of the Rings to try to make sense of their faith and their walk with Jesus. And I see people doing that with Narnia.
Oh, I think I see it, but not nearly as much as Narnia.
It's not as
happens all the time.
straightforward.
No, it's not as straightforward.
What I see, because when I encounter Lord of the Rings and that mythology, I'm instilled with like a desire for heroism and to be part of an epic tale.
Yes.
Which is a theme throughout, right?
Yes, that's right.
And I don't get that in Narnia. Narnia leaves me with this, in the end, God will rescue sort of sensibility. And that there's hidden things in the world around us, and, but it does feel a little more like Narnia is for younger kids.
I
and
know, it feels
Tolkien's for older.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Which is interesting because Tolkien's Hobbit was written for young children,
Yeah.
but it is of the same.
Still quite a dark tale.
It is a dark tale,
Yeah.
but it participates in the same philosophy, and therefore it is more mythic even than the Narnia books.
So I wonder how much of that was that Tolkien's kids or maybe grandkids were far more boys. Because I send my boys to read Tolkien, and the people I know who really love Narnia, it's my wife, it's my mom, it's I don't know.
That's an interesting
Which that
question.
story of heroism and epic adventure is a very 12-year-old boys that lights a fire that it doesn't do the same in most girls.
Yes. Have you read any of Tolkien's essays, particularly one on fairy tales?
No.
Okay. It's an exceptional read. It's 5-star out of 5.
I feel like every week it's you recommending a book and me saying I've never heard of it.
Well, on fairy tales, and I'll just make the one point. He says adamantly, it is not about 12-year-old boys. It is something much deeper. And when you are bit by the bug, you can be 12 or 102, and you will still love fantasy.
Well, that's
There's
true.
something else
But
at work
almost
here.
everything that any adult really gets passionate about, that started when they were 12.
Yeah.
Whether they're male or female.
This is not his point, though.
But that's not the case for 6-year-olds, right? Almost everybody, the thing you loved as a 6-year-old, you think, I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But those, sports teams or hobbies
Yeah.
or books
Yeah.
or movies
Yeah.
that you watched between the age of 12 and 17, they
Yeah.
really form what you care about as an adult.
Yeah. All right. There was a side trail. What else you got here?
Well, we got to talk about right to privacy. You keep bringing it up.
I didn't want to do another one of mine. Right to privacy. Okay, we'll do that. Let's ask this question.
Okay.
So I'm gonna state my thoughts and ask them at the same time, and you can give some feedback. So on second thought, the desire is to, when we read something, we're not just accepting what's said. We're thinking through, is this right? Does this make sense? We have a filter. We have a lens through which we view things. And so I read an article maybe 4 or 6 weeks ago, and a conservative guy is defending the right to privacy and the invasiveness of the police state that we live in today from a tech perspective.
Yep.
The role of Bush's 9/11 Patriot Act stuff and what the unintended consequences, et cetera, et cetera. The role of liberals today, they objected to that, but now since it's in their power, they are running with it. All this stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm reading all this, and I'm just thinking the question, wait a minute now. Do we have, and he's assuming a right to privacy is fundamental to being human.
Oh, okay.
And I'm questioning whether that's the case or not. Now, this, I know it's shocking to even, sometimes when you ask questions of people, they look at you and think, why would you even think that
How
or
dare
ask
you?
that? Yeah, I mean, what right to privacy? Of course we have a right to privacy. But I'm wondering if that's an inaccurate. We don't have a right to privacy. But rather we have a need for privacy, but not a right. And I think that would make some differences. My point would be, my evidence that I would marshal would be that if the world was unfallen, what would I want you not to know? God, we're sitting here talking in a room.
Yeah.
We believe that there's 3 of us here, right?
Yeah. At least.
At least, right?
Unknown.
That's right.
Frank Peretti style.
That's right.
Muscled,
and the gods we were talking about,
sword-wielding angels.
we might not be that important to them, but nevertheless, there are many entities. But at least let's just run with God. That God's in the room, so he hears everything, sees everything.
Yeah.
And we come to grips with that, and we learn and rewire our minds, so to speak, to think that that's actually a good thing. That's a part of being a Christian. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I don't have secret thoughts. I can't plan a rebellion against God. I can't steal money from a liquor store and plan to get away with it with 100% certainty. Because there is somebody, did you ever try to make a perfect crime as a kid?
That's crossed my mind, yeah.
I've tried to do it.
It was never robbing a liquor store. I don't know where that comes from.
Whatever you want to make it to be, a bank, whatever you want to do, the perfect crime, there is no such thing because of God. There is a being that says, I know everything. You're not private. Your thoughts are opaque to me. They're not opaque. I mean, they're transparent to me.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. And then as Christians, we cultivate that and say, but this is a good thing that he knows me.
Right.
And we develop that idea. But the idea is then, in a sense, in relation to God, there is no privacy.
Correct.
Zero.
Nor should there be.
And there shouldn't be.
Right.
So then why do we feel this need that when you and I can interact, we might share a lot of openness, but there would be things that we would think, that's only Luke's business if I want him to know about it.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a right to that.
Correct.
I have a right to privacy. Well, wait a minute. Is that our fallen nature speaking? Is that a necessity of the fall that has made us think those thoughts because we don't really handle well the things of a vulnerable nature in others?
Well, so we're talking about rights that the government doesn't get to overstep.
Well,
correct?
and that's where I would end up going is I think we have a need for privacy that we can constrain governments and neighbors with, but I think we should take it out of the talk of a right to privacy as if it's a human right.
Because thinking of positive and negative rights, right? That the Bill of Rights are a list of negative rights, things that the state cannot do, versus positive rights are, and I might be switching these definitions, I'm pretty sure I've got it. Positive rights are things that people claim the government must do, right? So when
Both
someone
are in
says
there, but
housing,
yeah,
when housing or healthcare are rights,
yes,
they're saying you have to provide it for me.
Yes.
And what the Bill of Rights is saying, no, these are the restraints upon the powers.
Yes.
Okay, so in that sense, what I think of the Bill of Rights are, and I'm a believer in negative rights as being really the only ones that matter, it's boundaries to keep the government from taking the position of God. So in other words, God gets to tell me what to say, so government doesn't. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
I do, yeah.
God protects me.
But I'm trying to add the wrinkle that I think that's a function of a fallen world
Absolutely.
rather than a human function.
No,
that's not baked
but I would
into
say
humanity.
all the Bill of Rights are that way.
I agree.
Or government law is to restrain
or let's say it this way,
government.
All limitations. Mm-hmm. So there's this phrase in Galatians, the works of the law, he's talking about, and don't do such and such and such and such and such, for they, bring death. But instead, love your neighbor, have joy, Against such things, there is no law.
Right.
There's this phrase, against such things, there is no law. So that law is an introduction because of our fallenness.
Right.
Boundaries, protection, restrictions, limitations. Mm-hmm. An unfallen world that is ruled by love with zero distortion of the mind and heart.
Right.
I'm thinking to myself, I don't know that privacy is something I ever care about. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not something I need.
Yeah.
It's not really a right in that sense.
Well, and you could say that's true of boundaries generally. So
that's
the
right.
boundary of
that's
my
right.
family versus someone else's family.
That's right.
My house
that's
versus
right.
your house.
Property.
Or the
possessions.
boundary between our country and another country.
That's right. That's right.
Those are all required to function in a broken world, but not ideal. When the world is made new, you won't need any of those things.
Right.
Which is why Jesus would say, marriage is not going to be in heaven the way you think it is
Oh,
here.
yeah, that's an interesting one.
Because you don't need those boundaries.
Yeah.
Because there's no corruption.
Yes.
Right?
I do think that's the heart of that thing about marriage is because it's anyway, yes. Yeah. So I think the reason that I think that's important is the two things. Number one, I'll go the least important one first because of your negative rights. Because I think the preamble, whatnot, sets out positive rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
And I actually question that too. But we'll talk about that another time. I wonder if that's rightly articulated or not. Do we have a right to happiness? The scriptures don't say that.
No, right.
In fact, it says if I'm not sure if right and expectation, how those begin to meld, but the expectation ought to be suffering.
Yeah.
Right?
So
which is contrary.
Isn't life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I need to look this up. It feels like that's in the Declaration.
Declaration. What did I say? I said preamble.
Well, because in the
Declaration of
Constitution it says
Independence,
life, liberty, and property.
Oh, okay.
And so part of the way I read that is that the way that you establish a nation where people preserve life, they preserve their liberty, and they're able to pursue happiness is by keeping the government out of their business. And if you do that well, in a healthy society where people are intrinsic, like they have their own moral compass,
Yes.
that's going to work.
Yeah.
When the moral compass fades, you're going to get a tyrant.
You're
going to need a tyrant
Yeah.
to protect you from your neighbor.
Yeah.
But when your neighbor and you have the same moral frame, you don't.
This gets back to the idea. I think that theism is the grounding. I don't think we were a Christian nation. I think we were a theistic nation, and that held us together. My neighbor didn't have to be a Christian to embrace that we shouldn't steal each other's garden fruit.
Yeah.
You know. But anyway, the second implication I think is a right, not a right to privacy, but a need for privacy, is I think that it highlights when we lose the categories of talking about life and we lose the idea of a fall, or you want to call it sin, if you want to call it brokenness, I don't care, but that something is off.
Mm-hmm.
If we lose that, then that's where that sea of chaos comes from then. Because we have no grounding to define and explain why things go awry. Why do we need to have a limitation on the government?
Right.
Why do we have to have that? Well, it's because we are broken people and power does corrupt. And so when you consolidate this, you have to set restrictions, or human nature as we know it today in a corrupt state will always come to control and destroy others. That's its inevitable pathway.
But that's also why, if you look at the foundational beliefs of a leftist, and I think liberals would agree, and this is why liberals are conducive to supporting and allowing the craziness that leftism brings in. And what I'm using those terms, I mean, a liberal wants to live and let live. A leftist wants to get their way, but move toward totalitarian power. So if you believe that everybody is intrinsically good and that left to themselves, they'll do good, then the only thing corrupting is society. Therefore, we have to fix society by exerting power.
That's exactly right.
That's what drives them to power.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is what all tyrants believe, even conservative ones.
Yeah.
Conservative tyrants also think if we just exert power, we can purify the nation. We can get rid of
if you're a leftist and what you just said, then if I'm a rightist, whatever you want to call me, and I say to you, we have a right to privacy.
Yeah.
Actually, in your worldview, not necessarily. Because if you can mend society to not hurt anybody, then you don't have to. You'll be the state and you'll be benevolent towards me, and I should be thankful to you.
All negative rights are constraints on the power of the state. Okay. And therefore, to every tyrant, that is it's in their way.
That's right.
Right. So they have to oppose every right.
That's right.
And the most primary being freedom of speech.
Yeah. And I'm saying that they have an internal logic to that. There's an internal logic.
Yeah.
So I think it would be better for us to speak about the need for privacy, because that brings in the assumption that if you run the state, you're restricted for other reasons. Your intentions we don't care what your intentions are. Mm-hmm. Have great intentions, fine. But our belief is that human nature has corruption in it, and you don't get complete power. Right. You will not get to a utopia.
Right.
All of your desires will never get there, even if you don't see it. It's been shown over and over. And I think that's a better argument than defending a right to privacy, as if we have a human right to it. Because I think, and here's the other thing, this ties in, I never thought about this till just now. One of the things I think is interesting about leftism or liberalism is how it allies with certain values of Scripture that we conservatives and evangelicals often overlook. For example, let's say communism. Okay, you can't deny that in Acts 2. I'll use this. I don't think it's communism, but it's communistic behavior in the sense that it's voluntary. What I have is yours.
Yeah.
Now the difference is the voluntary element.
It's a huge difference.
It's the defining difference.
It's the actual freedom.
But here's what we miss as evangelicals and people, conservative political people, is the liberal, they are identifying a good thing.
Yeah.
And their heart beats with a certain heartbeat that is the heartbeat of heaven. Now, the way they pursue it is not. It's because it's then forced. Luke, you have to give your stuff to Mike.
Right. That's
not heaven. Yeah. But when it says you should want to, actually that's true.
Well, it's heaven in their own making. It's heaven like Satan's describing heaven to Eve, you can be like God.
No. I disagree with that. I think it's right to say in heaven.
Because it's heaven on their own terms.
No. Oh, no, wait. If the terms are this, they had all things together.
Right.
Okay? That's not my own terms. I mean, it's Edenic. It's I might think of it, but that is the way it was intended. I don't think with the fall we would care if you needed something that I had and there's no fallen nature, in a heartbeat it would be yours. I don't care. Right. But then my neighbor would say the same thing to me.
So this makes me think of my interactions with African culture, West African culture in Sierra Leone, and how common it is for family members to expect that if you have any money, you owe it to me. And so people might get a job, and I've seen this when Westerners go and they might want to hire locals to help. And so then those locals getting paid by a Westerner, everybody knows now they have money. So then there's this intricate plan that they often use to conceal how much money they're getting. Because otherwise, in a tribal culture, what's mine is yours in the tribe, right? And therefore, I have to give all my money to my brother who won't get a job, or that,
right?
You know, and it's not the same quite get a job kind of mentality.
It is the same. That is what I'm getting at. Is that in an unfallen world that functions correctly?
Yeah.
If I have something and you need it, I'm happy to give it to you if you need it. I didn't even know. Here, take it.
That would only work if you had total trust that they're going to do the same in return.
Well, in an unfallen world, they would.
Correct. Right.
So, but we have a fallen world. So now we have to set up artificial limitations, and we have created what we're calling rights.
Yeah.
And I think they should be called needs, or some of these things, because right makes it sound like they have original intentionality and good purpose. And they're not. It's only because of the condition we're in that we have to live this way.
But see, even if I want to call them needs, it still feels like I'm asking from the government to give me what I need. And I think the founders and I agree.
Okay.
It's total reverse.
I'm okay with that.
This is a boundary that the
Sure.
government may not cross. That's how I think.
Well, the need was on the individual side, the need for privacy. So you're right. It's not a government need, a need from the government. So maybe there is a better word. I'm not sure. I'll have to try to think of one.
Yeah.
But I'm trying. I guess the thing that made me interested was the idea that I think the way we talk about it is being influenced by the loss of the storyline that the world is broken.
Well,
And if you lose that storyline, and then you start using language, you're going to distort. You're going to damage.
so I see this as the weakness of conservatism as a movement, is they often lack an idyllic future, a vision of a positive future that we want to create. So that's what, the accusation of being reactionary
And the draw
is
of
about.
a liberal.
That's the appeal of liberalism.
See, that's what I
especially
was
to the
trying to
young.
get at earlier.
Because
I
to
agree
the
with
young,
you.
the future is most of their life is still in the future.
Yeah.
Whereas to an older person, most
Yeah.
of their life is in the past.
And they haven't experienced difficulties. They haven't setbacks. They haven't even experienced their own corruption that will betray a friend.
Well,
and they have no sobering.
part of that idealism is a belief that unintended consequences won't apply to me.
Yeah,
Which is
you're right.
a big part of that. But so that's where I think something like Christianity should be used to portray a positive future. And I'm not post-millennial, but I side with some of their concepts because I think we're fine. So, and I think we've talked about this, that conservatives are the gas pedal saying slow down, but they actually need to take the wheel and say slow down so we can turn around and go the right way. But
Okay, we're going to get into our ongoing disagreement then. That's going to work itself out here.
yeah,
Because
we're going to work it out.
I think so.
Oh, okay.
Well, we're going to work on it. How about that?
We'll work on it.
Because when you say that, I immediately think, no, I don't know.
But why don't you want a Christian vision of the future?
Because I think for a political realm, I don't think that's what the Christian vision is. I think it is limited to its implication in this world. And I think that, so it's the whole idea of the now, not yet. That the kingdom is now, but not yet. It is not yet. But it is now, but it's not yet.
Right.
And so when I hear that, I hear
you want a Christian
the now.
vision for yourself. You want a Christian vision for your family. You want a Christian vision for, like, if you ran a business, you would use Christian ethics and godly principles.
Okay.
So why restrain it when it comes to government?
You're right. And yet, I'll be a little pedantic and say, no, I don't want a Christian vision for myself, but I'm being pedantic when I say that. I don't want a Christian vision for myself if what that means is that I set before myself what I think heaven would look like for me. I don't have that. I don't think it's I don't think it's achievable. So
Why is that required? Why do you assume that you would set for yourself some vision of heaven?
I thought that's what you were just saying. You want a Christian vision for yourself, for your family, for your business.
But then I'm not putting that constraint that this is what a Christian vision must be. But what I'm saying is, we can argue about what a Christian vision is for a government or a family, right? And we do, and we should, and Christians have for centuries. But to say we don't want it before we've even had out what it is, I think is a loss.
Okay, now I don't want to dilute what you're saying, but if I said it in a different terms, does it still mean the same thing?
No, I think that's a good clarifying strategy.
Citizenship. I think of it like citizenship.
Okay.
That being a Christian is, I have a citizenship I didn't have before, and it's now the primary citizenship.
Yeah, right.
I am a citizen of heaven. Mm-hmm. Now, I also think I'm a citizen on earth in a divided world, broken world, in a land that has this amount of freedom and this amount of slavery and et cetera, et cetera. There's worse than ours and there's better than ours currently.
Right.
But I'm a citizen of something, and so it's the States, right? U.S.
Yeah.
Now, my Christianity does not mean that my heavenly citizenship is going to displace my U.S. citizenship.
You get 2 passports.
I get 2 passports.
Sure.
Now, I want the air, the breeze of the citizenship of heaven to influence the citizenship on earth, but they're never going to replace one another. And I don't want the air, because there's toxic fumes in my citizenship from earth. I don't want it to creep into how I think I live before God, in a sense.
Okay.
So, but I think the reason I say it this way, or I'm testing this idea out in response to you, is that when you said a Christian vision, you want that as an individual, a family, and a business. What I'm hearing that as, even if you're not meaning it, is that your Christian citizenship, you want to come in and say, now that's your citizen as a citizen of the States. That's your citizenship as a father and husband in your family. And I say, no, it can't displace them. I want it to influence it, but they'll always be separate until the last days come and gone.
Yeah, and I think we are even seeing that when we talk about the difference between marriage in heaven and marriage now. And if somebody starts saying, well, let's make marriages like heaven, I'm going to have multiple wives and, we'll change all the rules because we're free in Christ. Mm-hmm. That person is off the reservation, right?
Correct.
And I think the same could be argued with governments. That if we start saying, well, let's put the Pope in charge of government, or you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Integrate the church and the state in that way.
Okay, so when
because
you
I
say
see
that,
a separation, even if you go back to Moses, God separated the role of Moses from the role of Aaron.
Yes, that's
right?
correct.
That Moses was the judge and Aaron was the priest. And
okay, so when you say that about the Pope, forget that Catholic, Protestant, I'm not dealing with that, but a religious leader.
Yeah.
When you said that, okay, I thought that's what you were saying earlier, that the best scenario would be a religious leader to be the president of the United States so that they could bring Christian values into that leadership. And so when you just said now, we wouldn't want the Pope, I heard you saying we would earlier.
Okay.
So I might have misheard you.
Well, so I want the Pope, or let's focus more on the local town, right?
Okay.
I want the pastors of our town to have a lot of say in how the town is run. Okay. I want as a member,
none,
right?
Not none. I want little.
And here's why: because if the school district, if the city council go off the rails and say, well, it's all the same gender, whatever. Okay. The pastor should have a voice to say, no, this isn't right.
Okay, do you mean authoritatively, governmentally?
What I don't want, or I don't think is a Christian vision, is to say, well, the pastor should always have a seat on the city council. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
But if the pastor got elected to city council, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
I'm hearing you say that, but so when you say I'm not.
What I'm saying is I don't think there should be a chair in the city council room where the pastor always gets to come and sit.
Yes.
Whether he's elected or not. No.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But if that pastor said, I feel God's call for me to get on the city council, Even though I'm the pastor, I'd say do
Okay,
it.
so wait,
Absolutely.
let's say that again. But when you said I feel God's call, are all the pastors supposed to feel God's call to get on the city council?
I think
In your
no. I mean, we all get called for different things.
Okay.
But I don't feel any
So-
Christian should feel constrained from getting involved in
So
politics
I agree with
and the
that
practical
completely.
outworking of Okay.
But what I keep hearing you say is, we're moved down to a local town, the pastors. I keep hearing you say, the church as an institution with its pastors should be partly in charge or in charge of they're the best ones to lead a town because they have the most moral vision from God and what would be best for humanity.
I think that's true.
Oh, see, I don't. I think that they should have influence. They should exercise influence as the church, but I think there may be one of them. Well, here's the thing, on a pastor, and depending on how small town you
I
want
mean,
to
it
get,
depends on the pastor.
I don't know that any pastor is called to government leadership in their town, unless you're incredibly small, because that's not their calling. They have a flock to care for. Their calling is actually non-governmental.
Well, so like our
non-US
town is a decent
citizenship.
example for the simple reason that nobody's employed in their role on a school board or on a city council. It's a one evening a month with
Sure.
some homework in between.
Yes. So if we get down to a certain size like that,
I don't think a pastor should be the mayor of Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's having two jobs.
yes, that's what
And
I was
that's
getting.
and two big jobs.
Yes.
But that's a time constraint. That's not a visionary
Oh,
constraint.
see, I think it's a visionary constraint.
Okay.
Because I think that the citizenship of the one is not the same as the citizenship of the other realm. And if you're called to, so I think what a pastor is saying, I'm still in this world, but I'm called for my work to function in the other citizenship more than my earthly citizenship. It's really hard. And so in a sense, I am working
So
out
you
of
maybe
that
you-
citizenship.
part of what we're seeing is your picture of ministry is different than mine as far as what it is definitionally. Because I don't think of it that way.
Ministry, and I think the role of the church, because I would say the same thing about the church, that the church is not a political institution. It is an invisible institution that is not a part of. In fact, you said something the last time, and I noted it but didn't respond. Something about that the kingdom of heaven, the governments are organized under the kingdom of Jesus.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. And I thought,
Okay.
that's not what I think. I think that
Well,
the
I want
kingdom
them
of
to
Jesus
submit.
is stealing the inhabitants. Yeah, I want them to submit. And that's not what I think. It's not that I wouldn't want them to, but I don't think that's the goal, that the governments are going to submit to the kingdom of Jesus. I think the goal is that Jesus is going to steal the citizens. He lets them have their government. He lets them be
What's that
run
based
by-
on?
Deuteronomy, when he says to let Israel is mine, says the Lord.
Right.
All the nations, let them have their gods.
But is it Paul
But
who
Israel's
refutes
mine.
that in the book of Acts by saying in the past God let the nations go their way, but now he calls them all to repent?
I'll have to think about that. I've never thought about that passage.
Because
in that way, in
what
that
I think
light.
of, and this is
I'm not
a
sure
little
if that's the
post-millennial,
nations. Yeah.
is to say that God is establishing justice in the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And he will, in the end, do it completely.
Yes, I agree
And
with
I
that.
see it similar to how he establishes justice and righteousness in us.
Mm-hmm.
That he is progressively saving us
So,
unto
all
final
the
and
nations,
complete salvation.
you and I agree that the nations are led by these lowercase g gods, right?
Sure.
And in
And now
all
we're at war with them.
probability, there is, well, we've been at war since the beginning, but in all probability, there's one for each nation in some sense.
It would
That
seem
might not be exact, but
Yeah.
something like that.
the 70 descendants of
Yes.
Noah,
And the
etc.
Prince of Persia, and
Right,
there's
yeah.
these hints in Scripture that there's some level of assignment. And
But they also seem to be at war with each other at times.
They are conniving with each other. That's
Yeah.
right. So, do you see the kingdom of Jesus comes and he builds this trans-geographic kingdom, people, indigenous peoples,
Transnational.
Trans is like a word that we're not even allowed to use anymore, right? Anyway,
Triggered.
something that exceeds the boundaries of these kingdoms and is the kingdom of Jesus and in the human heart, et cetera, et cetera. Now, do you see any individual nation that has a lowercase g God ruling it and having given been given power to oversee it, that it's going to submit, that being is going to submit to the authority of the kingdom of Jesus willingly as a part of the conquest of the kingdom of Jesus?
I don't know. I'm not. It's hard for me to picture what you're describing. You're saying if there's some regional spiritual being who's rebelled against God over this, like where we live in Oregon.
Well,
That
not if
being,
they are.
right.
Every government, every spiritual entity involved with the nations, they're all in rebellion to God.
Correct.
Every single one.
But so why do, here's my question. Why do the Christians have to be the underground? Is there a point where the influence of Christ and his gospel would be such that those spiritual beings, those corrupt spiritual beings, become the behind the scenes wishing they could get back into power? Do you see what I mean? That's what I see. Is the progression is a conquering of
back
positions.
into power. So power
Power
what about
in the
power
hearts
versus
of
influence.
Yeah, I think they're the same.
I don't. I think they're the same.
Well, in the sense that power
to me, you're
is
in charge. Influence is how effective that.
Yeah, power is I can make you.
Yes.
Right.
And to me, that never has. So when America, at its pinnacle,
Yeah.
it was a God-honoring nation in many respects.
Sure.
But I personally, theologically, believe that whatever lowercase g God was in charge geographically and whatnot, never lost that being in chargeness. But his influence was severely minimized.
Oh,
And
I
he
totally
wanted
believe
more.
they did. I think that's exactly what it means when Jesus says that all authority is now belongs to me.
Yes, so in my notes, we still have that thing to come
Yeah.
back to. But see, so you think that so whatever being this is, at the founding of America, at some point that being lost the role of leading this country, and for a season this country was under the authority of Jesus?
So here's an example. And this is a strange example, but it might work. Thomas Jefferson buys the Louisiana Purchase.
Mm-hmm.
It now belongs to America. And now he's going to send some emissaries, Lewis and Clark. Let's go scout it out. But they could arrive at every village, right? At every Native American, at every fur trapper and Frenchman and whoever's out there, and say, you have to obey us. It's not going to work. But there is a dominion being established now that the authority has been gained. And that's what I see as the story of the church, is that Jesus has established dominion, and now we establish his reign as we move through the world.
So dominion, okay, I hear what you're saying. When you say dominion, then, but you also mean ownership by dominion. So we purchased from France. So
Right.
we're the rightful, and France would acknowledge it. So when we get in a spat with the Indian culture there, France isn't coming to back them up because France says, I don't own that
That's right.
anymore.
Yeah.
They may not know it, but that's the reality.
Right. But so what Jesus is not,
you're saying
when he says all
Jesus
authority, he's
purchased-
not talking about land, but he
I
is
understand,
talking
right.
about every authority structure.
But you're saying that he purchased America. He purchased Europe.
Yep.
He purchased Russia.
continent.
And I've never
Even
thought about that way.
The aliens in Antarctica.
Yeah, see, I don't know that I see it that way. I see that what he purchased was the people in those things, but he is not purchasing the structures of authority.
So here's what I mean by the structures of authority, because I think they're pretty tight to each other in the sense that there's no person on earth that if you encounter and they submit to God, they do not become a Christian,
Correct.
right? Because Jesus has reign over them, but he still gives freedom to those his subjects, technically, right? Even to say you may enter my kingdom as a citizen, or you may remain as a subjugated foreigner. Yeah,
Okay.
I know that's a big one.
Yeah.
All right, we're long
Okay.
past an hour. You got any pressing
No,
topics
but
that you
know
want to
what?
jump into?
Nope. But I will say this. I'll say it out loud so we can do it. Because I've had in my notes the context of Matthew 28. Because
That's what we're talking about now, right?
I know exactly, and I did not come prepared to talk about that, but we should again. I'm glad it's come up.
Okay.
All authority has been given me, therefore go.
And part of why, the danger that we face in having the same argument, and we're making progress. I think we're hashing out and understanding each other better. But is that it becomes an argument over terms instead of an argument over purpose. And so part of what I want to say to the listeners too is part of why this matters is we're faced, and this is obvious, we're faced with what seems like a losing battle all around us in the terms of the culture's not only rejection of God, but hatred toward him.
Yeah, that's right.
And so there's a question of strategy as Christians
Yes,
as to
that's
how, what are
Yeah.
we just now the salt that's lost its saltiness?
Yeah.
And we can expect to be trampled and, what are you going to do? Or is there a battle plan? Is there a strategy outside of retreating to church and hoping they don't come for us or that they do last, right? Or that we're like, is it Hezekiah who says, well, if it comes in the age of my kids, so be it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's more than that, right?
And
the kingdom of God is more than that. And so we got to figure it out.
There's a precedent for this being a difficult subject.
Yeah.
In the early church, one of the difficult subjects was around martyrdom.
Yeah.
How to address martyrdom. And some portions of the church said, you face it.
Yeah.
Others said, you run from it and hide to preserve your life.
That's right.
And so you had different ages, and there's a lot that faced it. Then you have a catacomb season in which they go underground. And then the big thing, the most heated dispute came when you were being tortured, if you recanted verbally or not.
Right.
And some said it was the weakness of a moment, we need to give them grace. And others said, no, they recanted. They're out of the church.
Right.
So the point being,
And then they need to get rebaptized.
I mean, it's a difficult thing. And the reality is that the church was, in one sense, divided theologically, divided in perspective, but it was all in response to the circumstances that were extraordinarily difficult. Yeah. And the reality is we are entering those circumstances. It is not just a theological debate we're having or political debate. What you said, I think, is exactly right. The discussion on strategies is good and healthy for everyone.
Yeah.
And there'll probably always be some differences of opinion, but it's good. Everybody is going to have to figure out which one they think is most persuasive and live with it.
And I think part of the reason we can have a fruitful discussion on this is there's some fundamentals we both agree on. Mm-hmm. We both agree that we're not going to nice our way out of this.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
That this is not some product of stodgy old Christians making the gays hate them, right? There's no fault you can put on the church that's going to resolve this.
In a sense, there's a genuine attack. Agree there's a war,
which is not to mean we don't have things to learn
yeah.
from mistakes of the Christian past.
Yeah.
We do,
yeah.
But it's not so simple as to say, well, if only we were more appealing, then those who hate God would stop hating him.
It's a war.
If someone hates God,
that's right. That's what it is.
It could be that God was misrepresented to them.
Yeah.
Right? But it could also be that God was rightly making demands of them as their sovereign, and they refused.
Yeah, that's right.
And God is not under obligation to make his demands in some kind and gentle and quiet way that really neuters his actual authority. He gets to be God. That doesn't mean that he's not also loving. And so we need to express his love and his authority. And that's what we're trying to work out. I feel like that's what most of these conversations are, is what does God's loving authority look like at a city government? What does it look like in a national government, in international politics? But also, and I think maybe we could hit this more in our marriages. When I'm feeling down and not sure if I'm going the right way, how does God's loving authority guide me in that? And that's what I think thinking twice requires. That's what.
Yeah. So then I'll add one final thing that it requires, which I think I'm saying for the sake of people listening. Mm-hmm. One of the things I think we get to model is I think we both feel the liberty, and we're both strong enough individuals, personality-wise, to say, here's what I'm thinking. And if I hear something the other person says, I'll think about it. Maybe I'll change my mind, but I also am very happy to say, I don't see it that way. And where we end up having to end up with that is being good, because I have to do what I think is best, and you have to do what you think is best. I can disagree with you, but I also have to give you the liberty to say, I don't think you are demoted because you don't agree with my way of responding to this war.
Right.
I give you actually not only the liberty to act, but the liberty to say, well done, even if you would follow a course I wouldn't follow.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to end up as a church in that. And that's one of the things being lost in our culture, is the ability to disagree and still be friends.
Well, and I
and
think
still
that
give
is
value.
fundamentally Christian.
I
That
do, I
think
agree,
in
too.
countries where you see that most commonly at work in a positive and healthy way, it's because Christianity has had its influence.
Yeah.
Specifically Protestant Christianity.
Yeah.
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 All right, if you're still with us, we appreciate you. I'd ask you, share this with one person. If you found any of what we're saying helpful, we are trying to build, not just on this, but in our lives with the people around us. We're trying to build a mindset that's ready to face what's coming and face what God has for us, the good and the bad.
And I'll throw in my. I listen to you do our closing remarks often, right?
Yeah.
Share this with one person, and I always think to myself, I just am not wired to say it that way or to say that.
That's why
and
I
I
have to say
appreciate
it.
you doing it.
Yeah.
But today I had the first thought of what would I say? I would say this: talk about something that's made you think about with a person, and then you can tell them where you got it. But
There you go.
But think about it and bring it up as a conversation. Have this kind of conversation with someone else.
Okay, so what we're saying is you need to go to someone that you know and ask them if you could have Trump as your stepdad.
Oh, you're funny.
Would you say yes?
Oh, actually, that's a great idea. Get a question from some of the questions.
Yeah.
Say, I heard people talking about this. What do you think?
Do you think Trump would be a good stepdad?
These are great questions.
I think it'd be
to ask,
terrible,
by the way.
but that's all. All right. Until next time.